Hello everyone, welcome back to our next lecture. We are in the middle of our unit, Foundations of Modern Nations. Last time we took a look at what was happening in many African nations after decolonization following World War II. Today we're going to look at another nation that had some major impacts take place, once again because of the end of World War II, and that is the nation of India. Sadly, India is going to go through a lot of violence, a lot of division, quite literally dividing up into new other countries, and we are going to see the modern states of India and Bangladesh and Pakistan all form. And mainly in this situation, it wasn't due to lack of resources, as we saw in Africa, or debt that had been taken on. What we're going to see here are the major differences in religion among the people of India that led to this division. So enough introduction here. Let's go ahead and take a look at the case study of India and exactly what happened that led to so much violence in the 1940s and 50s. So, background. India is, of course, one of the oldest civilizations in the world, the birthplace of Buddhism, and today, extremely high population. Hinduism is by far the majority of the religious parties within India. There is a large Muslim population as well. And basically, the time period we're beginning here, all of those nations that you see there listed, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, they were all a part of India at the very beginning of what we are describing. Okay, and it's after World War II, after the British leave, that we're going to see this nation break apart into those others. And as I did mention, it is primarily going to be along religious lines that takes place. So the main conflict is going to be between Hindus and Muslims. Okay. The colonial history, you're probably aware that the British had gone into India very early on, 1700s. They began colonizing it fully by the 1800s, and it was a really one-sided relationship. The British were taking a lot of resources. They were taking them back home during the Industrial Revolution and manufacturing those goods, and then frankly returning right around and kind of selling them back to the Indians themselves. Now, the Indians, for the most part, did not want to be ruled by the British, and there had been some pushback. There had been some major rebellions that had taken place at points. But from 1857 to 1947, the British are going to rule directly in India, and that is mainly following, sorry, I'm kind of going out of order here, what was called the Sepoy Rebellion in 1857. Basically, you had a group of Indian soldiers that were being hired by the British. Well, the British had not really paid attention to a lot of their cultural items of importance, and these men who were being forced into service, both Hindus and Muslims, were forced to use ammo cartridges for their guns that contained pig grease. Well, to both Muslims and Hindus, that is a sin to actually come in direct contact with an unclean animal or any product from that animal. And so these men who were serving in the British Army basically rebelled, and there were 2 years of mutiny that took place in India, and the British really clamped down after that. So that is what leads to the British Raj, this period where India is ruled directly by the crown. It is not just the British East India Trading Company in there. They are directly ruled as a colony by the British. They will be ruled by the British until 1947. That is 2 years after World War II. Now, in that period, there were many times that the Indians tried to push for independence. In fact, the most coordinated effort came with the creation of the Indian National Congress, which was created before World War II, and ultimately became led by a man named Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, I'm sure we're all probably familiar, at least by name, with Gandhi. He will become the leader of this movement for independence for India. Now, Gandhi would spend his entire life leading a non-violent campaign. Now, that often clashed with British governments because what he was proposing was civil disobedience. Now, the method was through nonviolence, but he's telling people, don't pay this tax, protest, go out to the street and show the British we're not happy about this. One of his biggest protests was called the Salt March, and this was a major protest in which the British had had basically put in place a salt tax on the Indian people. And salt is something that in a poor country like India, they use a lot more than perhaps even we do. Salt was used to help preserve meat and different foods. So it was necessary for daily life to have large quantities of salt. And Gandhi said this is too much, that they're asking us to pay this tax on something we all need so desperately. And so he said, we're gonna attack this non-violently. We're gonna show the British exactly how much business we mean by taking to the streets. And when he began marching, at first there were a few thousand followers, but eventually the number of followers expanded to millions. Quite literally, millions of people would follow Gandhi in this salt march, in which they symbolically went to the ocean and began to create their own salt. So often after these protests, Gandhi would find himself imprisoned as being the leader of these protest movements. And often when he was in prison, he would utilize hunger strikes. He would protest while still in prison in a nonviolent way, where he would basically refuse to eat. If you're the British, you're in a bad situation at that point because you want to punish this guy, but at the same time, he's taking action that could possibly even, he could kind of kill himself if he does not eat while he is in prison. Do you really want the leader of this protest movement dying while he is in a British prison? Often he would get released because of that. So, but all of it was done through nonviolence. Never once did Gandhi call for violence to be used against the British. And frankly, I think that strategy paid off. And by the way, it's not anywhere in your notes, but if you ever come across information on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he modeled a lot of what he pushed for in the civil rights movement after what Gandhi had done about 20 years earlier in India with the British. Dr. King will make a career out of pushing this message of nonviolence. And sadly, both men their lives will actually end the same way. There's a lot of parallels between Gandhi and Dr. King. Now, all of this comes to a head in World War II. Okay, India. There was the question: should India, support Britain in World War II, or should they fight against Britain in World War II? And there were definitely some that said this is our opportunity to break away. But others said, listen, let's stay with Britain, okay, but let's get them to promise that we will become independent after the war. Britain did agree to that, and 2 years later, they did fulfill that promise. In 1947, India gets their independence. The British leave. India is finally on their own. But sadly, this is where many of the problems begin. I want to point out this map to you guys, and this is from 1909. It's a bit dated, but I love this map in terms of what it's showing. We'll start on the left. In green, what you are seeing are the Muslim populations of India and what will later be Pakistan. But the darker the concentration, okay, that means the more Muslims are present in that area. Now, if you compare that to the map on the right, you have the Hindu population. And again, the darker the red, the more Hindus live in those areas. So what we see happen after independence in 1947 is that the Muslim population is going to want to create their own nation. And that mainly takes place in the northwest corner of India, where the primary Muslim population exists. There's also going to be an independence movement to push the far eastern corner of India to break off and form its own Muslim-dominated nation there. Now, a lot of Indians were upset about this idea. We've just become independent. Gandhi was one of these. He said, we've just become independent. Now, all of a sudden, you want to divide us even further? He was very much against the division of India. But ultimately, it was decided that this partition should take place. Now, although this was protested by a lot of people, ultimately the UK helped draw up lines of where this new country of Pakistan, originally it was West Pakistan and East Pakistan. They eventually just called it Pakistan and Bangladesh in the east. But what the problem that this created was that there were a lot of, first of all, Hindus living in what was about to become Pakistan, that they wanted out of Pakistan, but you also had a lot of Muslims in India that wanted to be in Pakistan. So you had this massive movement of people at the exact same time. And beyond that, there's a lot of animosity that's been building. And so you start to have violent acts as all these caravans of people are marching through towns. In this event known as the Partition of India, upwards of 14 million people would basically be displaced. Homes would be burned. People would be moving from one part of the country to the other. And upwards of 2 million people were actually killed in this refugee crisis. This is one of the worst events in the 20th century. In one region, the Punjab region of India, you had 500,000 Muslims that were targeted and killed in the eastern part of that state. And then you had, in another region, you had 250,000 Hindus and Sikhs, which is a religious minority there, who were killed in West Punjab. So, both sides, and it becomes about revenge at some point. Well, they did this to us, we got to do this to them. And I tell you, it's terrible all around. But sadly, that nation could not remain united, and violence was the result. And to cap this with an even sadder kind of ending here, Gandhi, the man who had preached nothing but nonviolence his entire life, basically was shot down. He was assassinated because eventually he did give in and said that Pakistan should have a right to exist, and it was actually a fanatical Indian who decided to assassinate him for kind of giving in to that partition. So sadly, this man who preached nothing but peace and nonviolence was ultimately shot down in the most violent of manner. Now let's take a look at the current situation today in India, the modern conflicts that exist between India and Pakistan, because this is one of, there's a lot of harsh feelings that came out of that partition. Again, with millions of people dying on both sides, both of them see each other now as basically their most bitter of enemy. And this is such a sad story because it's completely unnecessary. But both sides, even though up until 1947 they were the same people living in the same country, ultimately they are going to see each other as the greatest enemy. And what makes matters even worse is that today they both have nuclear weapons. We'll talk about that here in a second. Now, one area of tremendous focus that both sides lay claim to is this region in northern India and northeastern Pakistan called Kashmir. There's nothing too special about this area besides the fact that both India and Pakistan claim ownership of this small swath of land. I want to go back really quick because there was another map I showed. There you go. If you look at the very top of India, you can see that region of Kashmir. See, what happened when the lines were drawn, and let me go back to this map. Okay, when the lines were drawn, you can see up there in Kashmir, the majority of people in Kashmir are Muslim. But when the lines were drawn, that land was given to India. And so India lays claim to it, even though the majority of people were Muslim. And so you have this fight that occurs because the people there, want to be a part of Pakistan. And so they claim to be a part of that nation. Whereas India says we legally have this claim to the land, even though culturally, different people. And so that it has basically led to really endless war in this region, fighting between India and Pakistan multiple times over their history. I mentioned in previous lectures having visited India. One of my best friends still lives over there, and I was able to visit him for over a week. And I actually met a couple men who were neighbors of his who were in the Air Force, and they had actually flown missions, under fire in Kashmir to rescue some Indian soldiers. And it was intense. It was just as hot a fighting as you would find anywhere else in the world. But this, is one of the biggest flashpoints in the entire globe. And sadly, this issue of Kashmir has just spilled over and made other issues that much more intense. There has been multiple terrorist incidents that have taken place between the two nations. In 2001, there was a group of Pakistanis that came into the Indian parliament, much like our Congress, and basically began shooting people. India, of course, responded by saying, Pakistan is supporting terrorists. They immediately put 1 million people on the border with Pakistan, and Pakistan immediately followed up by placing about the same number of troops right on the border. It did look as if we were going to see a war take place here Thankfully, cooler heads somewhat prevailed, but the biggest, like I said, the biggest issue here is that both sides have nuclear weapons, and I'll mention that here on the next page. There have been other severe incidents that have taken place. The Mumbai hotel attack. Mumbai is a major city in southern India that is often frequented by Westerners, and this hotel in particular was frequented by Westerners. There was a group of Pakistani terrorists that went in and attacked the hotel, basically shut it down, basically held everyone hostage, and were going from room to room killing people. Their main goal was to murder as many people as possible. In 4 days, they killed 174 people. I mean, this is one of the worst terrorist attacks we've seen over the last few decades. More recently, in 2016, there were 18 Indian soldiers that were killed on a military base as extremists came in and attacked this military base, and those people had ties to the Pakistani government. So, there's a lot of major issues that are going on here between Pakistan and India, and as I've alluded to multiple times here, the scariest part about both of it is that both sides have nuclear weapons. Since 1998, Pakistan and India both have nuclear bombs that they have threatened to use if things get too escalated. With the population density of these nations, if we see a nuclear war break out between Pakistan and India, we are talking about millions upon millions of people dead within minutes. And it has appeared as if this was really on the cusp at any moment. Thankfully, we have not seen either side fire a nuclear bomb in anger, at any point here. But this is still one of the biggest flashpoints in the world. And I guarantee within your lifetime, you are going to see another major event happen between India and Pakistan in which we get to the point of almost a nuclear holocaust between those nations. I think Delhi has like 30 or 40 million people in it. If a bomb hits Delhi, I mean they're gone. We've never seen destruction like that on a global or regional scale like this. Guys, that will do it. I hope you enjoyed this. This is one look at how things can go wrong with independence movements, and in this case, heavily divisive off of religious lines. And hopefully, we learn some of the lessons from the struggles they've had in India and Pakistan, and hopefully, we continue to see some form of peace in that region. Guys, as always, please email me if you have any questions. I'd be happy to get back to you. Thanks.